Moira, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, Justin.
Yeah, I'm glad that we finally get to sit down and have this conversation. I've been on your podcast. We kind of met, but didn't meet at Amberly Lago's event. You were in the audience. We kind of waved to each other. But then we're able to connect on Instagram afterwards. And, seeing the impact that you make in the world is something that's insanely inspiring. And I was like, I have to have this conversation on my podcast with you. But why don't we start out with who is Moira today? And then we'll break down how you got there.
Yeah. So it's funny. It's whenever I get introduced on a podcast or a stage or something and people, are like 7-figure CEO, keynote speaker, podcaster, blah, blah, blah. Like they give me all the accolades. I always have that moment of like, who the hell are they talking about? It just blows my mind what I've been able to create, who I've been able to become, because gosh, it started really messy. Really messy. So yes, I am a course creator, podcaster, speaker, coach. I'm obsessed with personal growth. So, probably a good fit for your podcast.
For sure. Yeah. So obviously, I think there's so many people in the world have been able to create so much great success in their life. And it really does start in a mess, right? It starts at that rock bottom moment. And so what I say all the time is like, you have two options when you're in your rock bottom moment. You can either declare it and use it as a jumping off point, or you can continue to sink into it, feel bad for yourself and make all the excuses in the world, right? So I'd love to get a little bit more into your mess and how you began your journey to now build this massive empire.
Yeah. So it started many years ago. I always like to go way back just to kind of get a little, source of reference here. So I grew up Irish Catholic, youngest of 6 kids. And I think when you're the youngest of 6 kids, you grow up a little bit faster, I was always the overachiever. I was really good at sports. I was really good at school. I was really good at all the things and just super type A driven. And I didn't realize kind of how much of a pressure cooker I created on myself. Like my parents, they really weren't parenting. I mean, I was a 6th kid. So I created that, I think, just from my personality and society. When you're rewarded so much by society, you start to become that identity of like, I am all of these accolades. And I also have addiction in my family. And so when I had my first drink at 14, looking back, I'm like, I feel like it was the first time in my life that I took a deep breath, where I finally just allowed the millions of plates that I had spinning to come crashing down. And I was like, oh, that felt good, and so I was driven to do it again and again and again and again. And I was, just off the cliff of addiction, mainly alcoholism. There were drugs in there. By the time I was, senior in high school, I was drinking every day. Wow. I was total blackout drinker, arrests, DUIs, looking from where I grew up, which was a pretty normal family because alcoholism wasn't in my immediate family. It was kind of in the periphery. And so I came from this very pretty wholesome, normal family, if there is such a thing, to what in the world happened to her, because it doesn't get any more rock bottom really than where I got to. I mean, in the end of my use, if I was awake, I was using. So I had to wake up at 20 years old and use to just, stop the crazy shaking and to be normal. And so I got sober by the grace of God. I had run away to California, and I didn't realize I was landing in the sobriety capital of the world in Southern California. I remember there were 3,000 meetings a week or something in my town.
Wow.
So found recovery, found sobriety, and really started to just put my life back together. And, it's always a tricky balance for me, even to this day, 20 some years later, between extremism in everything I do and trying to kind of find balance. But I will say this, and I think it's something that's not talked about enough. I will say the thing within me that made me an alcoholic is also the thing within me that allowed me to build what I've built in the world. And so I have been able to finally shift that identity and that story, which I carried for so long as shame and the scarlet letter. And, just this shame is the only word for it, with, being an addict, to maybe I wasn't born an addict, which I do believe I am genetically different, because I mean, I'm still, I was with some friends this past weekend and we got iced coffees and I drank mine in like 20 seconds. And I was like, who's the addict in the group? It's like, I do everything like an addict, but I've started to see that that can also be my greatest gift if it's channeled the right way.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I have found, just witnessing addiction in my life, people who have that, whether it's a predisposition gene or it's a learned process, I don't quite know. I'm not an expert in that whole thing, but I've seen people who, were massive drinkers, like to the point where you were. And when they finally got sober, they just refocused their energy, and then they got in the best shape of their life or whatever, right? They became addicted to the next thing.
Yes.
Because they're able to put their head down and go, I'm going to commit to this, put your blinders on and really, really focus. And I think that that's such a huge takeaway, to understand that even something like alcoholism or addiction can become a superpower.
Yeah.
Right. Like we talk about, like ADD becomes a superpower if focused in the right way.
Yes.
Very, very much the same thing. So talk a little bit about the big switch for you, because you talked about getting arrested and multiple DUIs, and like, when was enough for you?
Yeah. It's a tricky thing to pinpoint, because addiction well enough to know that an addict doesn't like think their way sober. It's not like, well, I got arrested and so I thought I should probably get sober. Like, there's no rational thought. Addiction just takes over your soul. And that's why I kind of always say, but by the grace of God. I mean, I definitely was suicidal. Like, this is my only option. Like, I can't get sober. I can't, like, that was the belief I had at the time, because I was trying to get sober, but I couldn't do it. And, became suicidal because I thought I can't put my family through this anymore. Like, this is the only option. I'm just such a burden to the world. And so I was at that point, and I had been around the rooms of recovery in and out because I'd been trying to get sober. And so luckily there were people around me that kind of showed up on my doorstep, and, just like any good addict, I mean, I followed direction too. It was like, well, you drank every day, go to a meeting every day, surround yourself with people in recovery. So I really, because people are always like, well, what did that look like? I'm like, what it looked like was basically inpatient rehab in the real world, because that's how much I was like immersed in the world of recovery, because that was the only way, unless I went away to rehab, that I was going to get it. So I look back on my first full year in recovery, and I was either asleep, awake, or asleep at work, or like at a meeting, or with people in recovery, because I could not trust myself to be alone with my insane head for a minute, and it built this foundation of recovery, but it also built this foundation of, I mean, I got sober in AA. So it's like the principles and the 12 steps of AA, which are really a way of living, which are really, I think, the foundation of my life that I always go back to. And it's interesting because I've always been an entrepreneur. I had successful businesses, through my 20s and 30s. I stepped into coaching when I was 37, about 10 years ago. And that's where like that next like major uptick happened, where like, wow, you've always been successful, but like you just 10x'd your success. Like, how in the world did you go from where you were to where you are so quickly and so radically? And I'll tell you, the thing that happened then was I became obsessed with personal growth. I'd always been spiritual. I'd always been kind of a little in that self-help world. I'd always loved it, but there's a difference between the softer, kind of more spiritual self-help and the like, let's fix your brain self-help. Like, let's take action. Let's go through the work. Let's do the processes. Let's break through the self-limiting beliefs. Let's create a new identity. And I probably did in those like first 2 years into the coaching world, like what most people don't do in a lifetime. I got obsessed. I used that obsessive gene I have to just dive deep. And that is the catalyst for all the success, because it takes a hell of a lot of work. And we all come up against self-limiting beliefs and roadblocks, and, we're not living into our purpose, or we're not showing up for where we want to go. We're showing up for who we are right now. And it's like, really, if you learn these things and you do the work, I believe that anybody can break through to that level. Absolutely. And so it's like, I just have this passion to teach and equip and show women mainly, but anybody, like, you too can get there. You just got to know some things and do some things and really jump into the deep end, and you'll just get there faster. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love it. So what was your introduction into the coaching world and the self-development world?
Yeah. So it was through network marketing, believe it or not. The thing I said I would never do, like never. I don't care how much I like your jewelry or your oils or whatever it is you're selling. I will never. I used to say I will go to my grave before I ever do that. Like no way, no how. But I had a fitness, health, wellness background. I was a Pilates and wellness studio owner for like 15 years. And so I got swept into the world of Beachbody, and it was, you know, wellness, fitness, nutrition, and personal growth. So that was kind of when my eyes were open to, you know, being in the room with speakers like Darren Hardy, with Brendan Bouchard, with these amazing thought leaders that, again, I went deep on their work and learned everything, and that was changing everything. And I had this business model in front of me with an entrepreneurial background that I just kind of slayed, you know, like I became the top coach in the company.
Wow.
You know, I just had radical success fast. Because I'm an addict, right? Like it's like
Yeah.
I do everything to the nth degree. I was working 24/7. I mean, I look back on that, and I also say this, I'm a little anti hustle culture, if that makes sense,
For sure.
because I don't think you can build $1 million business without hustling your face off, you know, for a season. It's like I worked my butt off for 5 years to build that business to an extremely successful level. And, you know, I don't regret it for a minute. I still believe if, you know, anytime I tackle a new venture, I'm like, I gotta treat this like a newborn baby, right? I've got to just be with it 24/7 before it's ever going to walk or crawl on its own. And understanding, because I've also been an entrepreneur my whole life, right? I just can't work for other people. I just can't do it. And so I've always understood, no matter how big or small the business is, like you have to work really hard for nothing to one day, hopefully, like reap this incredible success. You're never going to get there unless there's a ton of sacrifice on the front end. So I think that's really the greatest perspective I had coming into network marketing. I understood I've got to work like I'm making 6 figures, 7 figures if I ever actually want to get there, even when I'm making $100, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Where
I
you're
don't
like,
think
well,
a lot of,
when you break down the how much am I making an hour, and I've
yeah,
been there, right? You're just like, oh my gosh, I'm getting paid like 3 cents an hour at this
yes,
point.
yes,
Like
yes,
it's just crazy. But it is that all the workload up front for a payout in the back end, right?
yes,
Because you have to be able to push through those hard moments. Like I'm a big believer that life will get the hardest right before you level up. Right? Like
absolutely.
that's the challenge. And so it's the question is, are you going to fight through that moment, or are
Yeah,
you going to quit
yeah,
and do something else or whatever? And I want to stay on the network marketing thing because I'm not
yeah,
against it. I'm not one of those
yeah,
people that are like, network marketing is stupid and blah, blah, blah.
yeah,
I've never personally done it. It fascinates me. I know
yeah,
I'm friends with a lot of people who have made a lot of money in network marketing
mhm,
and different brands and things like that. And obviously I'm very familiar with Beachbody. I've done the workouts. Sean
yeah,
T's been on the show. Joel's been on the show. And
yeah,
so, you know, very, very familiar with the brand. What do you feel? And I'm going to talk about this in the contrast of people who jump from one network marketing to the
yeah,
next, to the next, to the next, and they're kind of obnoxious online. And you're like, what
yes,
are you doing? This isn't working. Like, I would love to learn your approach in the network marketing world
yeah,
from a standpoint that I think anybody can learn from it about building any business.
yeah, yeah. That's a great question. So, you know, it's truly, I would never, ever, ever do any other network marketing company because who I am is fitness, nutrition, and personal growth. And nobody else is doing that out there, right? I don't want to sell your oils. I don't want to, like, that's just not what I believe in. You know,
Yeah.
it might be somebody else's passion, but it's not mine. I don't want to sell a product either. So I think that's the reason Beachbody spoke to me, because we coach people. We don't just sell product to people. It's just there. I don't think that there's any other network marketing company out there like that. So personally, I would never, ever, ever, no matter what the opportunity is, ever do another company. But I think the reason I had success is, you know, I said it earlier, I became obsessed with personal growth. And so you're working with all of these people that are trying to break through, that are trying to work really hard despite getting paid 3 cents an hour. And when you have kind of that personal growth mindset where you've allowed these things to change you, then you can give your team the tools that they need to break through, right? You can motivate, you can inspire, you can teach people how to create a vision and a why, and keep them on the course. Where if I'm just trying to teach you how to sell something, I'm just, doing sales for another company, yet another company, and it's not going to change. I think the other thing that I believe so wholeheartedly in is I truly believed in what we did, listening to personal growth, working out and eating right. Those things will change your freaking life. And I believe that. So it was always like, how is this going to change your life? Like, truly tell me where you're struggling. Let me help you with these tools that I have. And so it was always about the other person. It was never about, oh, well, nobody's saying yes. They're not ready and I'm getting so annoyed. It was like, I'm just looking for that next person that I can help. So I think when you are, servant heart led, when you are truly in it for the people on the other side, that's when you sell. That's when you have success. That's when you grow. And it is really hard to make that pivot when you're like, yeah, but I really just want to make six figures, or I did too. I'm financially driven. I always say I'm not financially driven, but I'm freedom driven, and
Sure.
money gives you a whole hell of a lot of freedom. And so, but it was still always them first. It was the belief that I had in the thing that I had found, that I would never have been able to create anything like I've created if I was just trying to sell a product. You got to really believe, and you got to be in it for the other person.
Yeah. And it's so true. And we were talking about both of us run a mastermind, and we were talking about the masterminds before we hit record. And number one rule in my mastermind is you have to give more than you receive. And I believe when you're in that mindset where you're giving as much as you possibly can with no expectation of return, you also understand that at some point, it might not be from the person you gave to, but the universe, the world, God, whatever you want to say, will repay you. Is that what you've noticed through your life as you were building your business?
100%. I mean, it's a belief system, right? And everybody's belief systems are so radically different, but I have that belief system. Like, if I just wake up and I serve and I overserve, and that is literally my number one agenda all day, every day, it's going to come back to me. I just had that trust and that belief and that faith. Bob Berg wrote a book, what is it called? Anyway, look up Bob Berg. I can't remember what the name of the book, but it was one of the first books that I read. And it was like the law of kind of always giving more than you're ever expecting to receive. And it was like a law of success. And I remember reading that the first time and being like, oh, and really having to change my belief system. And I think that's the thing that happens when you become obsessed with personal growth. You start to change your belief system. You start to change your perception of the world. You start to change how you operate in the world. And that changes everything, everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so true. And so obviously
The
you're
Go-Giver.
surrounded by.
That's the name of the book, The Go-Giver.
Okay, I've heard of it. So the funny thing is, I'm a
I'm
a book title person, not an author person. So like, if you told me, hey, Justin, what's your favorite book? I'll tell you, but I could never tell you who wrote it. Right. It's just not who I am. So when you said the author and not the book, I was like, that's impressive. It's impressive. But honestly, like, you have surrounded yourself with incredible people as you've been able to grow and become the person you are today. And I'm sure that was the case as you think about it, right? In recovery, you surrounded yourself with the right people in that space. And then in business, you surrounded yourself with the right people. And now in life, right? You're mentored by Bedros and all these amazing people. What do you say is the secret to making sure you're constantly surrounded by the right people to support you in that process?
Gosh, I think you have to be bold, right? You have to also invest in your business and invest in your friendships, in your time. And, it's so funny you made that connection to recovery, because when I stepped into network marketing, I remember being like, holy crap, this is exactly like when I got sober. Like, find the people, right, that are successful. Don't hang out with the ones that are relapsing. Like, they teach you in AA, like, stick with the winners, and I was like, okay, I need to go to coffee with this person. I need to like step away from this person who seems like they're a catastrophe. Not that I'm judging. I want to surround myself with the people with who I want to become more like. And so in business, I have never hesitated to, send somebody a voice text on Instagram or reach out or say, hey, could you hop on a call and, can I pick your brain for 15 minutes? I have always been really bold in that because people are people. Like, I don't think I'm anything special. If someone's bold enough to say, Moira, can I get 5 minutes of your time and have a conversation? Yes. Like, I just think everyone that we so often have up on a pedestal, they're just normal people that were right where you are at some point in time too. But I think the investment of time and money is important, right? One of the first big leaps that I took, and I just talked about this in a podcast episode, was I went to Tony Robbins when there was no way I could afford it. No way my husband was going to be a fan of me just picking up and flying halfway across the country for, airfare, hotel, ticket to the conference. Like, I didn't know a soul, right? Like, I just felt that whisper that was like, you need to go to this event. That's uncomfortable, right? Like, everything about it was uncomfortable. Like, I don't know anyone. I don't have the money. My husband's going to be pissed. Go anyway. Like, I've always just been bold in that action. And that 4-day event, like, completely shot off the rocket ship of like all of this massive personal change that led to the next thing, that led to the next thing, that led to the next thing. And there's so many times where I'm like, okay, maybe somebody does say at this point in time, like, hey, come to my mastermind group, or hey, join us for this weekend. And I'm like, all I want to do is stay home, like, I just want to stay at home. And I'm like, get uncomfortable, be uncomfortable. Just this past weekend, I was leaving my son's baseball tournament. I was so hot, so exhausted, 4-day baseball tournament. I'm like, every fiber in my being just wanted to get in the car and drive home. And I told a friend of mine that I was going to meet her. And this isn't really the same realm we're usually talking about. It was a yoga festival. And I'm like, that's outside my comfort zone. I've never been to a yoga festival. I don't know if I want to do that. That seems uncomfortable. I don't know who's going to be there. I don't even know what this looks like. And Friday afternoon, I had to like self-talk myself. I'm like, get in the car. Being uncomfortable is a good thing. Like, just freaking go. You're going to be happy when you get there. Like, you sign up. You always teach being uncomfortable is the pathway to growth. Like, be uncomfortable. Being uncomfortable is going to the yoga festival right now. You want to be comfortable. You want to go home. You want to relax. You want to chill. And I'm like, don't do it. Don't do it. And so I had to like grit my way through that. It was the most amazing weekend ever, right? Surrounded by like beautiful souls. And I have to remember sometimes in my vision and the identity of who I want to become, I want outside the box life experiences. I want to put myself in uncomfortable positions. I want to, be the one in the room that feels inferior because everyone else seems so amazing in the room. Like, and I just do that again and again and again. But yeah, putting yourself in relationship, in community, but being intentional about it. I mean, I think I reached out to you first, and said, hey, we never had an opportunity to meet. But then it's like, we hit it off and I'm like, this is important to me, investing in the relationship, keeping the conversation open, reaching out to you and just saying, hey, how's it going? Just wanted to check in, I was thinking about you. Like, invest in the development of relationships because they will take you everywhere. And it's not that they will take you everywhere, but it's also, it's like the lifeblood of what keeps you going. It's the part that's like, this is all worth it. I mean, I've always believed on some level that like relationships, this is what it's all about,
Yeah, I mean, that's all that matters, right? Like, the wealth that you build, the things that you collect, you can't take them with you, right?
Nope.
And so the lives you can impact, the friendships that you make, that's the game-changing thing for me, right? I went to an event when I was in a place where I was like, I shouldn't be going to this. Like, I actually asked my friend to buy me the plane ticket. And I was like, I'll pay you back. And I did. But like, that whole thing of like, I was uncomfortable and I showed up to the event and the one speaker I could care less about blew me away. This guy named Fabio Viviani from Top Chef. And I was like, I turned to my friend who was at the event with me and I was like, I need to be friends with that guy. A year and a half later, he came on the podcast. He's now one of my really good friends. He changed the course of my podcast because he went on to introduce me to 40 people to be on the show, like Andy Frisella, Bert Kreischer, like all these high level individuals, and a number of them have become friends. And it was that getting uncomfortable that got me in that position to say, okay, I'm worth it, right? Yes. I'm worth the amount of time and effort I'm putting into myself. Right.
Yes.
Like, and it's so funny you talked about how you hate the idea of hustle culture. I was on a podcast one time. I said in the interview, I was like, I hate the word hustle. I forgot the name of the podcast was the Happy Hustle Podcast.
Oh no.
I was like, well, that's not, and then I was like mid sentence right after I said it, and I remembered. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just did that. Like in my head. But the reality is, if you don't put yourself in these uncomfortable positions, your life is never going to change. People ask me all the time, how do you stay in touch with Ed Milet after he was on the show? I go, I just stay in touch and I don't expect anything from him.
Right.
The reason you're intimidated by it is because you want something from him. Right. And so again, going back to give first mentality, and the rest will take care of itself. It's really just about showing up as your best self. And I think that's really the win. Right. And so as I hear this story, you continuously push yourself to get uncomfortable, try new things, continuously attempt to launch things like masterminds and get on more stages and all these things. So what is next for you in this journey as you continue to grow your own brand and your own impact?
Yeah. And this, this goes back to something I say a lot, listen to the whisper. It's like, it might be the whisper to like, go to an AA meeting back in the day, call this person, message this person that you're totally intimidated by. And I definitely have known my whole life that I need to write a book. So I think that's the next thing. I think I'm going to tackle it. This is kind of a business tip too, because I'm such an entrepreneurial visionary person that it's almost like it's the biggest blessing and the biggest curse, right? Because it's like I'm constantly given these ideas, and even my husband's like, when are you going to stop? I'm like, I don't know, because you feel this like God calling to do this thing and then do this thing and then do this thing. And it's not about the money, right? It's just about the impact. I'm like, I need to do this mastermind so I can help more women. I need to launch this, journal so everybody has this in the palm of their hand so they can change their life. Like it's zero about the income now, but it's about the impact. And that whisper in my soul is overwhelming to write the book. But what I was going to say about kind of the business tactic that I had to like figure out myself is, there was a time where it's like, well, it's a podcast and a book and a mastermind and a journal and a course. And it's like, well, where do you start? And I think for me, I've always had to map out, like even on my whiteboard behind the computer, it's like 2022, 2023, 2024. And I just pick one a year, right? Like which one feels right now? Which one feels like it's time? And I go all in on launching that one thing, not 5 different things simultaneously. And like I said before, I treat that like a baby. I give it all my attention, all my energy. That's where the focus is until it gets wheels under itself. And then it's like, okay, now there's a little bit more space for this next thing. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs are trying to do way too many things, and they've got 4 or 5 different things that are all barely doing anything. And it's like, you got to just kind of cut the fluff and focus on that one. And, the podcast being one, and I'll share this really quickly because I always heard the whisper to do a podcast. Like, so many of my friends are like, why aren't you doing a podcast? And I'm like, I'd be like, almost like hyperventilate with anxiety. Like it's so overwhelming to me. I don't even know where to start. I don't know, like, why do you have headphones on? Like, I mean, the littlest things would just like lock me up. Right. And I did this for 2 or 3 years. Every year, major goals for the year, podcast, to the point where a couple years ago, I wrote down podcast in January, like on January 1st or the end of December. And I was so sick of myself, right? I was like, shit or get off the pot. Like either stop writing this down or freaking do it. And I was like, okay, I'm doing it. And, you get that motivation where you like make a couple phone calls, you decide to do the thing, you order the mic. And I still couldn't do it. I was like frozen, like uber successful, Moira Kucaba, frozen. So it happens to us all the time. That's so important to hear. And I called one of my best friends who I knew which one I was calling, right? And I said, she's like, hey, what's up? And I said, hey, I'm sitting here and I can't do this thing. And it's why I'm calling you. And she's like, oh my God, what is it? Because she's like the bully friend, right? She's the bully.
She's the bruiser out of the 5 people.
Yes, the bruiser. Yes. When you talked about this on stage, I was like, I know exactly who my bruiser is. I called my bruiser. And I mean, she yelled at me like in the most loving way, right? But she was like, it's 11 o'clock. You're going to get off this phone by 1 o'clock. And I knew I had to hold my word to her. right? Like I couldn't be like, okay, thanks for the phone call and then not do it. Like I needed her to bruise me into it. I needed to make that phone call. That was really uncomfortable. I knew the second I picked up the phone before I went to dial her, it was game on, you know?
Yeah.
So there were I have so many moments of complete fear and paralysis still, but I know what to pull out to make me break through.
Yeah, and we say that
Yeah.
all the time in our mastermind when somebody's like, "Oh my gosh, I feel so uncomfortable to do this," and then the response is usually, "Well, that's why you need to do it." Right? I
Yes.
think like it's interesting. I believe I have this weird thought process on spirituality and the life that we're living and all these things. So I believe that we chose this life, and then like literally to the point of where we chose our parents. And like
Yes.
you look at my parents, like why would I choose my parents? Like
Yeah.
that's bonkers, right? Like you
Yeah.
choose your life, and then in the human experience, it's your goal to figure out your purpose.
Yes.
And that's the uncomfortable part, right? When you get uncomfortable, when those butterflies happen, all those things, like that's what you need to be doing.
Yes.
That's where you need to be. And it's scary because there's a lot of pressure when you're living full in your purpose.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
eyes are watching you. You're worried about judgment. You're worried about people, saying, "Oh, you're not good at that." Right? Like I was a really, really bad podcaster for years, like real bad. Like I've gone back and listened to like early episodes and I
Same.
cringe.
Yes.
It's
Same.
terrible. Now 7 years in, the podcast is the thing that changed my life.
Yeah.
Right. It was my vehicle to build my brand and everything that I'm doing, which has been amazing. And so I love that you shared that because I still get uncomfortable, right? Like somebody asked me one time, like, what's the last thing you were uncomfortable with? And I was like, well, I just announced an event last week and it was the scariest thing I've ever done. Like it was the first event ever. Right. So every time you begin to level up, it's that discomfort that you have to push through. And I think that's just so key. So I want to ask you a question that I ask every single person on the show.
Yeah.
It's a 2-part question. The first part is, what is your definition of success? And the second part is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
I would say my definition of success is going back to the concept of freedom, right? I want to do what I want to do, where I want to do it, when I want to do it. But with me, with my personality, when I find that thing, I'm not just being like, so I get to do it when it's convenient or, on a Monday afternoon when I'm relaxed and have all the time in the world. Knowing that the thing that you find that you love, that is your purpose, is also going to be the thing that calls you to be uncomfortable, calls you to break through the fear, but also you can't not do it, right? Like it's just, you're obsessed with it, right? So doing that thing, and that's why I'm careful to say that doesn't feel like work, because everybody says that, because I'm like, oh, I feel like I work a lot, but I'm doing the thing that I love, and that's freedom. That's total freedom, right? And so I'd say that's my definition of success. It's like, and also the people part is such an equation of that, like being able to spend time that I want. Last weekend I had one of those moments where I was like, there's no other place, like this is what it's all about. There's no other place I want to be in the world. It's a Wednesday afternoon and I'm at a baseball tournament with my son. There is no place I'd rather be than watching my kids play sports. And it's Wednesday and I'm not stuck in a cubicle. I can take my work wherever I want to go. So I think the people part is huge. Like I also want to make sure there's enough time in my life to cultivate relationships, to spend with those I love, because going back to what you said, that's everything,
Yeah, I love it. And what are 3 things you do every day to ensure that success?
Yeah. So, I would say, so I do have a morning journal that like, I literally just was using my own personal process and was like, everybody really just needs this process because it's so easy. So I wake up and I write down 5 things that from the previous day. So I'm not looking at it like from a big telescope standpoint. I'm looking at like in that day, what are 5 things where I can see that life is working out for me, right? That the universe has got my back. Maybe it's things I'm incredibly grateful for, but 5 things that happened in the previous day that were awesome. Because I have to condition my brain to constantly see the good, because all of our brains are wired against us, right? We're going to focus on all the negatives. So I condition my brain every single day. I ask myself what I'm proud of myself for every day. I write down what I'm excited about, because I also have to reframe like, oh, I have to do this. I have to do this. I have to do this. And I'm like, no, I'm excited about this. I get to. So reconditioning that. And I work out every single day. That's priority for me. Not every single day, but most days I move my body. And then the other thing that I think you might have told me this. I really am intentional about connection with people, right? Like it might be a text message. Some days it's more intentional where I'm like, okay, I really need to sit down for 30 minutes and touch base with like everybody that's been on my podcast, or things like that. But sometimes it's a sister-in-law or an aunt or a friend or somebody, but giving, something to somebody else, pouring into other people. Nothing about that messaging is what I'm going to get back from it.
Yeah.
I think just giving every time that, when people are really stuck, and this comes from recovery, it's like, get out of yourself, go do something for somebody else, go serve somebody else, go smile at the cashier, just give back. Because I think so much of depression and anxiety is when we're so focused in on the microscope, just focused on the negativity in our own life. And when we can pull back and do for others, everything changes.
Yeah. And I think people listening might be thinking, well, it's easy for you to give, right? You have resources, you have connections, you have people, but the reality is all it is, hey, I'm thinking about you.
Yeah.
Right. Like, hey,
Yeah.
you're on my mind. And everybody has the ability to do that.
Yeah.
And that's really that life-changing part. I was out for a morning walk the other day and I was listening to some motivational talks while I was doing it. And something came up and it developed a new mantra for me. And the mantra that I now say to myself is I refuse to get comfortable in my success. Because I remember the times where I watched my mom's car get repossessed. I remember the times where my debit card got rejected for a $2 slice of pizza. I remember all these times, right? And so if I get comfortable in my success, it's hard for me to push further into my purpose, right? So this is my new mantra, right? I refuse to get comfortable in my success. So I'd love to hear from you. Do you have a current mantra? What goes through your head as you're pushing through all the things you have to do?
Yeah. So many. I just have a wealth of mantras that I pull from depending on what I need. Right. And it's just changing that self-talk. Like sometimes this is like in those moments of fear, it's like, this is what I signed up for. This is what I'm made for. Like, this is my purpose, like push through. One of my favorite mantras that I've always kind of pulled out for years is guide me to thoughts that are in line with my deepest desires. Guide me to thoughts that are in line with my deepest desires, because I think I know what my deepest desires are. I know my God, my higher power knows what those deepest desires are. I also know from all the brain science I've studied that everything comes from a thought, right? So just guide me to those thoughts. Just guide me to those thoughts. And I love thinking about that because it's not, driving you towards a specific thing. You're kind of giving it over to say, just guide me to the thoughts that are in line with my deepest desires.
I
Yeah.
love that because, what is it? They say you have 50 or 60,000 thoughts a day.
Yeah.
And the follow-up question that is how many of them are productive, right? So if we're intentional about our thoughts regularly, it's going to obviously create a better life for you in the long run, which I absolutely love. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Before we get there, how do people get a hold of you? Where do they get information from you? What's all the good stuff?
I always say it's easy and hard. Moira Kucaba, not easy to spell, right? Moira Kucaba, but that's it everywhere. It's Instagram, YouTube, website, TikTok, like all the things. So you can just find me there. I'm probably on Instagram the most, and I answer all my own DMs. So feel free to DM me and I'll message you back.
Awesome. I love it. So like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Since the show is called The Growth Now Movement, that question is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
I would say my sobriety, for sure. It was life or death. So it doesn't get any bigger than that. And I think what I also want to leave people with that isn't necessarily a mantra, but I think the single biggest question that's changed my life and changes it literally on a daily basis is, how is this a gift? In any single moment, no matter if you're stuck in traffic, like I was in park on the interstate, coming home Sunday for 2.5 hours, my car was in park. And I was like, I could have gone down that downward spiral. And I was like, how is this a gift? How can I use this time? Like, no, I've gone through tragedy and I've asked myself, how is this a gift? And it has taken me from the depths of hell to seeing some silver lining in the tragedy. And so I really just want to leave your listeners with that, I mean, sticky note it on your computer, put it in your dashboard, put it on your bathroom mirror, like asking yourself, how is this a gift, has the power to change every circumstance in your life.
I love it. Moira, I've loved this conversation. Like I said, I love what you put out in the world. So thank you so much for doing what you do and showing up and continuing to do so every single day.
Well, thank you. I am so grateful for your friendship. I'm so grateful to be here. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
That was